This is a short video about the two Marais flute duets that I recently published an article on for the American Recorder magazine. In this case, presenting them as recorder pieces. So they were originally written for the transverse flute, and to play recorder on those pieces, we normally transpose up a minor third. So these two pieces, the first one is entitled Bouquet le Caracoleur, and the second one is a musette. In this first duet, this was taken from a manuscript that I have of flute pieces by Marais. He alternates in this manuscript between sets of pieces for flute and bass and duet pieces. And these duet pieces especially work nicely on recorders. One of the things we run into when we play flute music on the recorder is that if the flute music is using the upper register of the flute, which Marais does a little bit, the tessitura gets pretty high on the recorder. So a high D on the flute, which we wouldn't think of as a particularly high note, is a high F on the alto recorder, which is a pretty high note. So part of playing these pieces is being able to use good thumb technique and just being able to get a nice sweet sound when you're up high, not letting it become forced and strained sounding. So that is a good thing to work on in these pieces, I think especially in this first duet, because there are some fairly long high Fs and long high E flats as well. So one of the performance issues that we deal with, especially in this first duet, is the idea of inégal. And inégal is, or inégalité, is the practice of playing certain notes not in the rhythm that they're notated, but in an unequal rhythm. This is somewhat akin to playing in jazz music or even in Celtic music. Often things that are notated straight are not played straight. So how do we know where to do that and exactly how to do it? Because obviously unequal can be anything from something that's very dotted to something that just has a slight lilt to it. In terms of how we know where to do it, it is usually applied to notes that we would think of as a medium note value in the piece. So in this first duet, it's very clear the medium note value is the eighth note. And eighth notes, I think we could say, are the most common notes that end up being played inégale. As to how unequal the notes should be played, that's kind of a matter of taste. In my opinion, this piece sounds nice with quite a light inégale, and you'll hear in the recording that David Dyer and I made what I think of as a pretty light inégale. It's interesting, when we sat down to record these, we had never played them before, and I think we both had the same idea about how the inégale should work, which is a nice thing. Oftentimes, it's difficult to get this very light feeling of inégale, and one of the ways to try to learn to do this is to first play with a triplet rhythm. Or for the top line. And then, ideally, I think it sounds nice if it is slightly less unequal than a triplet. It's very easy to play things either dotted. You could play, but I don't think that fits the character of this piece, so I wouldn't do that. But I might go and try to make it a little bit less unequal than a triplet. It's a little bit tricky, but if you practice playing it as a triplet and then try to play it less than a triplet, you might find the groove that works nicely for this piece. Marais uses very few ornaments other than written out ornaments, so very few ornament signs. I think in the case of this duet, the only ornament sign is the plus, which means always, in this case, a trill from the upper note. And one of the characteristics of trills at this time is that if it's on a longer note, the trill starts slower and speeds up, and if it's on a very quick note, then it would just be a very quick trill, still from the upper note, but not spending any time on it. This particular movement, I think, only has trills on longer notes, usually dotted quarter notes. There are a few places that are a little tricky for ensemble. If you look at the music on the second page, starting at measure 36, there's this yam da ti dum ba dum ba dum ba dum. When we get to measure 38, the two recorders have to do that together, and then in the next measure, the top recorder has a slightly more complicated version of the same thing. So fitting that all together is tricky. One also has to be careful at the beginning of the piece not to start faster than you're going to be able to play these last two lines. In the title, Les Caracoleurs is referring to a dance that was performed by horses, and from what I understand about the dance, it involved the horses going in a straight line and then making a sudden circle. And I think if you look at the themes of this, it has this circular motion. It goes straight and then there's a little circle. So I think the piece is trying to imitate the motion of that dance, which is quite nice. The second piece is also by Marais, and it is included in my manuscript, but in the manuscript it is a version for flute and bass. However, Jacques Martin Haute-Terre, in his first book of brunettes, includes this piece as a duet, and he recognizes that this was composed by Marais and he is arranging it for two flutes, and which I have turned into a version for two recorders. A musette is a type of bagpipe that was very, very popular at the end of the 17th century and into the 18th century in France. It was known as kind of a chamber version of the bagpipe. So it's not a big loud instrument like we're used to hearing with Highland pipes. It's a very intimate sound. It's very sweet and just has a buzzy quality to it. The instruments can be quite fancy, and obviously people who played them well could do amazing things on the musette. So a lot of composers wrote pieces that are not intended to be played on musette, although you certainly could, but are kind of imitating the sound of the musette. And so you can kind of imagine, especially as you're playing this beginning part, that there's a drone going on underneath, as there would be normally on a musette. The other thing is that the musette can't be articulated with the tongue the way the recorder can, and so musette pieces are generally written in a very smooth way. And so our approach to this is to try to keep things very smooth. I think Inegal is not really an issue here. The rhythm is pretty much the way it is. Now, Haute-Terre does use more different ornament signs than Marais. In Marais' version of this that I have, I believe he only uses the plus sign again. But here, Haute-Terre, who had earlier published a chart with 13 or 14 different ornament signs and explaining what they all do, uses a number of them here. In the first full measure, you see a little mark, which I call a dagger, above the first note. And that is what Auditeurs would call a battement, or which we might know as a mordant. So that's how that works. And the plus sign is just, in this case, a fairly short trill, so not a lot of length on the upper note, but still starting on the upper note. And he has one other ornament that he only uses one time. That is in measure 12 in the first part on the first note. That V, and that is an appoggiatura from below. So if I play from bar 11, would be how you play that. And like the first duet, one has to be a little careful about the tempo. It's very easy to play these this first phrase at any tempo you want, but as you see when we get down here to measure 27, all of a sudden we have to be able to go rather quickly. And some of those are difficult in terms of ensemble, just trying to get everything lined up well. But I think it's a terrific piece. I should mention that this piece, the real origin of this piece is as a viol piece. So Marais wrote it first as a viol piece, and it obviously was a very popular piece because it appears in a lot of different sources arranged in different ways. So I hope you enjoy these pieces. I think they're fun to play. They're in a very beautiful French style, and learning to make the ornaments fit in well and to have the rhythm and sound be very beautiful, I think is a good objective. So I hope you enjoy them.